My ex was using my photos as his own to build a photography career. I found out when a client showed me his portfolio and I recognized my own images. What happened changed what I thought I knew about 5 years together. There are images that take time and presence and a type of attention that not everyone has, that are not just pressing a button. They're the result of years learning to see light in a specific way, to anticipate the moment before it happens, to know when to wait and when to act. Every photo I had given Sebastian during the 5 years we were together had that story behind it. It was not just a pretty image. It was a moment I had captured for him, with my camera, with my eye, with the years of practice that make an image what it is and not something else. And he had taken all of them, had uploaded them to an account I did not know existed, had presented them as his own, and was getting work with them. My name is Valentina. I am 32 years old. I am an events photographer with 7 years of independent practice and reputation. I have built project by project at weddings, corporate events, and portrait sessions. Sebastian is 34 years old. We have been a couple from when I was 25 to 31. 5 years together. A relationship that, when it ended, was with the maturity of two people who had loved each other and had reached a point where their paths needed to separate. Without major drama, without accumulated resentment, with the kind of ending that allows two people who shared 5 years to run into each other on the street and say hello. That had been our breakup. Until the Wednesday, when a man who wanted to hire me to photograph his daughter's quinceañera showed me the portfolio of another photographer he had considered and discarded because his prices were higher. The man's name was Ernesto. We had had an introductory meeting where he had told me about the type of event he wanted photographed. At the end of the meeting, he had taken out his phone to show me some examples of the photography style he was looking for. He had told me he had found another photographer on Instagram whose images seemed very good, but whose prices were out of budget. He showed me the profile. The username was Sebastian Photo. The first 3 images I saw were mine. Not similar to mine. They were my images, with my composition, with my light, with the specific editing I use that I have spent years developing. One was a sunset in Oaxaca I had taken during a trip we had made together in our 2nd year as a couple. I recognized it before seeing the second frame. I told Ernesto those images seemed very interesting. To ask the photographer when he had taken them and with what equipment. To give me a moment to check something. I went to the bathroom. I opened the Sebastian Photo profile on my phone. 147 posts. 12,000 followers. The most recent posts were from recent events that clearly were not my images. But going back in the feed, the proportion changed. Of the first 50 posts chronologically, at least 35 were mine. Images from our travels together, from moments I had captured, from places we had visited, all published as his own work, all with comments from people congratulating him on his talent, some with mentions of jobs he had gotten based on that portfolio. I went back to Ernesto. I told him I had recognized some of those images as mine, that he was not the photographer who had taken them, that was something I was going to need to resolve. Ernesto looked at me. He asked whether I was sure. I told him yes, that the Oaxaca sunset I had taken myself on a personal trip, that I could show him the original RAW file on my computer with the camera metadata and the date. Ernesto told me the situation seemed very serious, that he would wait for me to have more clarity before making his hiring decision. I left that meeting and walked 2 blocks before sitting down on a bench, not to physically catch my breath, to order what I was processing. What I felt was not simple. There was anger, specific anger about the use of images I had taken. That were not decoration. They were my work, my eye, my time. There was also something harder to name. A retroactive review of 5 years of relationship from this new information. Every image I had shared with him. Every moment I had captured thinking it was a gift for someone who appreciated it. Reframed now as material he had stored with another intention. Or that he had at least decided to use that way at some point after he separated. I did not write to Sebastian that day. What I did was document. I took screenshots of every image in the Sebastian Photo profile I recognized as mine. I searched my files for the corresponding originals. I verified the metadata of each original image with the capture date and camera data. By the end of that afternoon, I had documented 38 cases. 38 of my images published on Sebastian's profile as his own. I called an attorney who had worked with photography and intellectual property. Her name was Isabel. I described the situation. She told me what I was describing was a copyright infringement. That as the author of the images, I retained rights over them regardless of having shared them with Sebastian privately during the relationship. That sharing an image privately does not transfer copyright. That publishing them as his own was plagiarism and unauthorized use of someone else's work. That I had legal options, but that before going in that direction, it was usual to send a formal content removal request. That in many cases that was sufficient. That if it was not, the legal options remained available. She also told me to consider reporting the images directly to Instagram, which had a copyright infringement reporting process that could result in image removal or account suspension. I made the reports to Instagram that night. 38 reports with the original images and authorship documentation. Instagram began processing the reports. Within 48 hours, 12 images had been removed. The process for the remaining ones was ongoing. I wrote to Sebastian 2 days later, not emotionally, with the clarity of someone who has had time to process and who knows what they want from the conversation. I told him I'd found his photography profile, that I had recognized 38 images as mine, that I had initiated the reporting process with Instagram, that I wanted to talk to him before deciding whether there were additional steps. Sebastian responded that afternoon. He told me we could talk. The conversation was by video call. Sebastian arrived at that call with the expression of someone who knows there is no elaborate defense that works in the situation being presented. He did not deny the images were mine. He told me that at some point after we ended, he had started uploading photos from our travels together to Instagram. That at first it had been without thinking about the consequences. That when he had started receiving positive comments and accumulating followers, he had stayed with it. That when a first work request had come in based on the portfolio, he had accepted. That at that point he had known he had crossed a line, but had not known how to go back. I asked him whether at any point he had thought about telling me what he was doing. He told me yes, many times, that he had never found a way to do it. I told him I understood what he was describing, and that it did not change what he had done, that the images were mine, that his portfolio was built on work that was not his, that had consequences for me that were not abstract, that potential clients had seen my work attributed to him, that there were people who had hired him based on images that did not correspond to his real capability, that was also a problem for those people, even if neither of us could see them in that moment. Sebastian said he understood, that the images still on the profile, he was going to remove himself before Instagram processed them, that he wanted to do that before I needed to ask him formally. Sebastian removed all the images within the next 24 hours. The Sebastian photo profile was left with the recent images that were genuinely his. Significantly less impressive than the original portfolio. Significantly more honest. I did not initiate additional legal action. What Sebastian had done was a real infringement with real consequences. And the removal of the images did not undo the harm already done. The accumulated followers. The work obtained. The reputation built on someone else's work. But the decision not to go further was mine, based on the calculation of what I wanted to invest in that process and what I expected it to produce. Not because the harm did not deserve more, but because what I wanted was for my images to stop being where they were. That had been achieved. The cordial relationship that had remained after our breakup no longer exists in the same way. There is no declared enmity. There is the specific distance of someone who has used something of yours in a way you did not choose, and that information retroactively changes the way you look at 5 years of shared history. Ernesto hired me for his daughter's quinceañera. It was a good event. What I wanted to take from this story has very practical parts for anyone who works in creative fields. The first, images you share privately with close people do not lose your copyright. Sharing is not transferring. Gifting an image does not authorize whoever receives it to publish it as their own. The second, if you discover that your images are being used without your authorization, Instagram, Facebook, and other platforms have copyright infringement reporting mechanisms that work when the documentation is clear. Keeping original files with metadata is the simplest way to have that documentation available when it is needed. The third, If the use of your images has generated documentable economic or significant reputational harm, legal options exist and are accessible. A consultation with an attorney specializing in intellectual property does not require you to decide to litigate. It requires you to understand what options you have. If this story reached you, comment. Are you conscious of what happens with the copyright of images you share privately with close people, or had you assumed that sharing them means the other person can use them however they want? Like if you believe using someone else's creative work to build one's own reputation is one of the forms of theft society most easily normalizes because it does not seem like tangible theft. Subscribe for more real stories. Share with someone who works in photography, design, writing, or any creative field and who might benefit from knowing exactly what their copyright protects. Practical tip. If you're a photographer, activate Google Images alerts for your most representative images. Google Images has a reverse search function that allows you to find where an image is being used on the internet. Doing that search periodically with your most recognizable images is the simplest way to detect unauthorized use before it becomes a portfolio of 12,000 followers.